In September 1939, a merchant vessel was proceeding on a designated course in the North Atlantic without escort. The radio was operating. Navigation lights were illuminated. Weather conditions allowed visual observation for several miles. According to the watch log, at 21:17 an explosion occurred beneath the hull. No warning was recorded. Within 7 minutes, the engine room was flooded. The vessel stopped, having transmitted no distress signal. Within 24 hours, another ship disappeared in the same grid, sailing independently. No radio transmissions were intercepted. Neither vessel showed signs of surface combat. No hostile ships were observed on the surface. No aircraft were present in the air. Naval patrols arriving later found no debris beyond isolated objects floating on the water. The report stated that the attack occurred without a fight. There was no gunfire. There was no pursuit. The ship simply ceased movement and then vanished from the sea surface. The same documents noted another detail: at the moment of sinking, no other vessels were present in the area. At the same time, a German submarine departed from its base on a route passing near the reported position. Its radio remained silent. Its course did not change. Its crew reported no contact. At the outbreak of the European War in September 1939, German naval authorities activated standing directives governing submarine operations against merchant shipping. These directives had been developed during the interwar period within the framework of the Reichsmarine and later the Kriegsmarine, incorporating experiences from the submarine campaign of 1914 to 1918 and the limitations imposed by international maritime law. Submarine flotillas stationed at Kiel and Wilhelmshaven received operational orders defining patrol areas, rules for identification of targets, and procedures for attack. Crews were briefed on the use of torpedoes, deck guns, and signal flags, as well as on the handling of prisoners and survivors when circumstances permitted. Submarines departed their bases individually, proceeding through the North Sea toward assigned positions along shipping routes leading to the British Isles. Early patrols encountered merchant vessels operating under peacetime navigation patterns. Many ships sailed independently, without escort, and maintained standard lighting at night during the initial weeks. German submarines conducted surface patrols during darkness to conserve battery power and improve speed. Commanders relied on visual observation through the conning tower and periscope, supplemented by hydrophone contact reports. Upon sighting a vessel, identification procedures were initiated, including recognition of hull form, superstructure, flag markings, and, when visible, name and home port painted on the stern. Reports were transmitted by radio in encrypted format to Naval Command, providing position, course, speed, and estimated tonnage of observed traffic. When an attack was authorized, submarines maneuvered into firing position ahead of the target's track. Torpedo firing solutions were calculated manually using estimated range, angle on the bow, and target speed. Gyro angles were set at the torpedo data computer. Firing was executed from submerged position when possible to reduce detection. Torpedoes were launched singly or in short salvos, depending on target size and available weapons. Following launch, submarines altered course and depth to evade countermeasures. In cases where torpedoes failed or targets were small, deck guns were employed, usually after surfacing and ordering the vessel to stop. Merchant crews often had limited warning. In numerous recorded instances, ships were struck without prior signal, particularly during submerged attacks. Explosions caused immediate flooding of cargo holds and engine rooms. Ships carrying bulk cargoes such as coal, grain, or are often settled by the stern or broke amidships. Lifeboats were launched under varying conditions, sometimes successfully, sometimes impeded by list or structural damage. Submarine commanders observed sinkings through the periscope or from the surface, recording time, position, and estimated loss in the ship's log. Survivors were occasionally questioned regarding ship identity and cargo before the submarine departed the area. As the campaign expanded, patrol zones extended into the western approaches, the Bay of Biscay, and the North Atlantic. German naval intelligence compiled data on shipping density and convoy movements from radio intercepts, reconnaissance aircraft, and reports from returning submarines. Operational orders were adjusted accordingly. Submarines were directed to concentrate along known routes between North America and Britain, particularly in areas where sea lanes converged. Weather conditions played a significant role in operations. Heavy seas affected periscope use, torpedo accuracy, and deck gun employment. Fog and low visibility reduced detection but complicated navigation. By late 1939 and early 1940, British authorities began implementing convoy systems more extensively. Merchant ships were grouped and escorted by destroyers and other warships equipped with depth charges and sonar. Submarines encountering convoys adapted their tactics. Night surface attacks were conducted by approaching at high speed from outside the escort screen, firing torpedoes into the mass of ships, and withdrawing before escorts could respond effectively. These attacks relied on darkness and the difficulty of detecting a low-profile submarine on the surface. Submarine commanders recorded increased opportunities for multiple attacks during such engagements, though risks from ramming and gunfire also increased. Countermeasures intensified as escorts improved coordination and detection. Depth charge attacks followed torpedo launches, forcing submarines to dive deep and remain submerged for extended periods. Crews endured prolonged periods at depth with limited air and rising humidity. Damage from near misses affected hull integrity, machinery, and crew endurance. Submarines reported incidents of leaking valves, disabled motors, and temporary loss of power. Despite these conditions, patrols continued according to schedule, with boats returning to base for refit and resupply before redeployment. The introduction of magnetic pistols for torpedoes led to a series of malfunctions during this period. Premature detonations and failures to explode upon impact were recorded in patrol reports. Technical assessments were conducted at shore facilities, and interim orders modified firing procedures, including changes in depth settings and the use of contact pistols. These issues affected attack outcomes and were noted in operational logs without alteration of overall mission directives. As operations progressed into 1940, German submarines were deployed during the Norwegian campaign. Patrol areas included coastal waters and fjords, where navigation hazards were significant. Submarines targeted troop transports, supply ships, and naval auxiliaries supporting Allied forces. Shallow waters limited diving depth and increased vulnerability to detection. Minefields further constrained movement. Submarine commanders relied on detailed charts and careful depth control. Attacks were often conducted at close range due to restricted maneuvering space. In parallel, merchant shipping continued to adapt. Ships were painted in camouflage schemes designed to distort outlines. Zigzag courses were adopted to complicate firing solutions. Wireless silence was enforced to reduce radio direction finding. Despite these measures, independent sailings persisted in certain regions, particularly for neutral shipping. German directives distinguished between belligerent and neutral vessels according to flag and cargo, though identification at sea was not always conclusive. Incidents involving neutral ships were recorded and reported through diplomatic channels. Throughout this phase, submarine operations were documented through standardized reporting formats. Patrol reports included departure and return dates, areas patrolled, weather conditions, sightings, attacks, and expenditures of torpedoes and ammunition. Crew casualties and material damage were listed. These reports were archived and analyzed by staff officers for planning purposes. Training programs for new crews incorporated lessons derived from these records, focusing on navigation, attack procedures, and damage control. Submarine life followed established routines. Watches were maintained around the clock. Engines were serviced daily. Torpedoes were inspected and maintained in their tubes. Food supplies were rationed according to patrol length. Fresh water was conserved. Communication with headquarters was limited to essential transmissions to avoid detection. When radio messages were sent, encryption protocols were followed precisely, and transmission times were kept brief. As the campaign continued into the summer of 1940, the operational environment shifted with the fall of France. New bases along the Atlantic coast became available, reducing transit times to patrol areas. Submarines began operating from ports such as Lorient and Saint-Nazaire. This change altered deployment patterns and increased time on station. Patrols reached farther into the Atlantic, encountering shipping lanes previously beyond practical range. Merchant vessels operating in these waters included tankers, freighters, and passenger ships repurposed for transport. Cargoes ranged from raw materials to manufactured goods. Sinkings were recorded across a wide geographic area, from the waters west of Ireland to the approaches of the Caribbean. Submarine commanders noted variations in escort presence and response times. In some regions, escorts were scarce, allowing attacks with minimal interference. In others, aggressive pursuit followed immediately. The cumulative record of attacks during this period consisted of individual actions rather than coordinated fleet engagements. Each sinking was documented as a discrete event, defined by time, position, and tonnage. The absence of direct combat between opposing surface forces characterized much of the activity. Submarines operated independently, engaging targets without warning and withdrawing upon completion of the attack. The sea remained the primary medium through which these operations unfolded, governed by navigation, detection, and the mechanical performance of vessels and weapons. By the end of this phase, patrols continued without interruption. Boats returned to base, were refueled, rearmed, and sent out again. Crews were rotated as required. Shore personnel processed reports and issued new orders. Merchant shipping adjusted routes and procedures. Escorts patrolled assigned sectors. The operational pattern persisted, defined by movement, observation, attack, and withdrawal, recorded in logs and reports as events occurred. By mid-1940, submarine patrols from Atlantic bases followed revised operational schedules. Transit from French ports to assigned patrol areas required fewer days, allowing extended presence along shipping routes. Boats departed singly, time to avoid congestion in harbor approaches and to reduce the risk of air observation. Harbor defense zones were cleared under escort until open water was reached. Once beyond coastal patrol limits, submarines proceeded on diesel engines at cruising speed, maintaining radio silence unless contact reports were required. Patrol areas were defined by grid references issued before departure. Commanders were instructed to remain within assigned sectors unless tactical circumstances required deviation. Upon entering patrol zones, boats conducted systematic searches, alternating surface running at night with submerged daytime operations. Lookouts were posted continuously when surfaced. Periscope observations were carried out at intervals during submerged periods. Hydrophone watches were maintained to detect propeller noises beyond visual range. Merchant traffic density varied by region and time. In the North Atlantic, traffic was often dispersed, with ships traveling independently or in small groups. Submarines adjusted search patterns accordingly, employing zigzag patrol tracks across known shipping lanes. Upon detection of a vessel, commanders assessed speed, course, and escort presence. In the absence of escorts, attacks were frequently conducted from submerged position during daylight hours. At night, surface approaches remained common due to higher speed and improved visibility of silhouettes against the horizon. Torpedo attacks followed established procedures. Fire control calculations were conducted using optical range estimates and stopwatch timing. Errors in estimation were common, especially under poor visibility or heavy seas. Commanders compensated by firing spreads when torpedo supply permitted. Following launch, submarines executed evasive maneuvers, altering depth and course to avoid counterattack. In unescorted situations, boats sometimes remained in the vicinity to observe results or prepare additional attacks. Sinkings were recorded with attention to technical detail. Observations included angle of list, time to sinking, secondary explosions indicating cargo, and behavior of the vessel after impact. Ships carrying oil or fuel frequently burned before sinking. Others flooded rapidly without fire. Submarine logs recorded weather conditions and sea state at the time of attack. These details were included in post-patrol reports. Survivors in lifeboats or rafts were sometimes encountered after an attack. Procedures regarding interaction varied depending on circumstances. When conditions allowed and no escort threat was present, submarines occasionally surfaced to question survivors about ship identity, cargo, and destination. In other cases, boats departed immediately to avoid detection. These actions were logged without commentary, noting only time and duration of surface presence. As Allied convoy systems expanded, submarines increasingly encountered escorted formations. Convoys varied in size, speed, and composition. Escorts included destroyers, corvettes, armed trawlers, and auxiliary vessels. Detection equipment included sonar and visual lookout posts. Submarines approaching convoys relied on darkness, weather, and escort disposition. Surface night attacks were conducted by penetrating the escort screen at high speed. Commanders aimed to position the boat within the convoy columns before firing. During such attacks, torpedoes were fired at close range against multiple targets in succession. Reloading procedures were conducted under time pressure. Forward and stern tubes were used depending on firing angle. After expending torpedoes, submarines withdrew at speed. Escorts responded with searchlights, gunfire, and depth charges. Near misses caused structural stress and internal damage. Crews conducted damage control measures, shoring bulkheads and repairing systems while submerged. Depth charge attacks varied in intensity and duration. Escorts dropped patterns based on sonar contact or estimated positions. Explosions caused temporary loss of lighting, dislodged equipment, and increased internal noise. Crews remained silent during attacks, reducing movement to avoid detection. Air quality deteriorated during prolonged submergence. Carbon dioxide levels rose, requiring careful management of air purification systems. Despite these conditions, submarines continued patrols until fuel, torpedo supply, or damage required return to base. Navigation back to port followed prescribed routes to avoid minefields and patrol zones. Upon arrival, boats were met by harbor control and guided to berths. Crews disembarked for rest while technical inspections were conducted. Damage reports were compiled, and necessary repairs scheduled. Torpedo performance issues continued to be reported, including failures of magnetic pistols. Adjustments to firing depth and pistol selection were issued through operational orders. Throughout late 1940, operational areas extended farther west. Submarines reached waters near Newfoundland and the mid-Atlantic. These patrols required careful fuel management. Boats carried additional provisions to sustain extended deployments. Contact with shipping increased in these areas, particularly with vessels traveling without escort. Attacks were conducted according to standard procedures. Reports noted longer intervals between sightings due to wider ocean spaces. Air patrols posed an increasing threat. Aircraft equipped with bombs and depth charges patrolled coastal and convoy routes. Submarines responded by remaining submerged during daylight near patrol areas and surfacing at night to recharge batteries. Aircraft sightings were logged with time and position. In some cases, sudden attacks forced emergency dives. Damage from near-miss bombs affected pressure hull fittings and external equipment. By early 1941, coordination between submarines increased through radio reporting of convoy sightings. Boats receiving contact reports were directed toward interception points. These operations required precise navigation and timing. Radio transmissions were kept brief to reduce interception risk. Submarines converged on convoys from different directions, attacking in sequence rather than simultaneously. Each attack was conducted independently, with no direct communication during engagement. Merchant shipping adapted further. Convoy discipline improved. Escorts employed more systematic search patterns after attacks. Some ships were equipped with defensive armament. Anti-submarine nets and barriers were deployed in certain coastal areas. Submarines recorded increased difficulty approaching targets in these zones. Minefields were encountered more frequently. Charts were updated based on intelligence reports, but uncertainty remained. Operational losses among submarines occurred during this period. Boats failed to return from patrols. Their last reported positions were noted in records. Causes of loss were not always known. These events were logged administratively, with boats struck from operational lists after designated intervals. Replacement crews and new construction entered service to maintain patrol strength. Training continued at shore establishments. New commanders studied patrol reports and navigational exercises. Emphasis was placed on submerged handling, periscope discipline, and evasion techniques. Technical instruction covered engine maintenance, electrical systems, and torpedo handling. Crews were assigned to boats based on availability and experience. As patrol cycles continued, the pattern of operations remained consistent. Submarines departed, searched, attacked when opportunity arose, and returned. Each patrol added to the accumulated record of sightings and sinkings. Logs and reports documented these activities in standardized formats. The operational environment was defined by movement through designated sea areas, observation of shipping, execution of attacks, and response to countermeasures, all recorded as events occurred without alteration or commentary. By the spring of 1941, submarine operations followed established rhythms shaped by patrol endurance, logistical capacity, and the evolving pattern of merchant traffic. Boats departing Atlantic bases carried fuel and provisions calculated for patrols lasting up to 6 weeks. Commanders received intelligence summaries outlining recent convoy routes, reported escort concentrations, and areas of reduced activity. These summaries were based on radio intercepts, reconnaissance reports, and debriefings from returning boats. No forecasts were included, only current observations and grid references. Transit routes to patrol areas were adjusted to avoid known minefields and air patrol zones. Navigation relied on dead reckoning, celestial fixes when weather permitted, and coastal bearings during departure and return phases. Errors accumulated over long distances, requiring periodic correction. Submerged navigation was limited by reduced speed and reliance on gyrocompass readings. Logs recorded course changes, estimated positions, and environmental conditions at regular intervals. Upon arrival in assigned sectors, submarines conducted area searches according to prearranged patterns. These included straight-line patrols across shipping lanes and loitering near choke points such as straits and coastal approaches. Detection depended on visual sightings, hydrophone contacts, and occasional radio reports from other boats. Periscope use was restricted to brief observations to reduce wake and visibility. Commanders balanced the need for information against the risk of detection. When hydrophone operators reported propeller noises, submarines altered course to investigate. Speed and bearing estimates were refined through repeated listening. Once visual contact was established, identification procedures commenced. Flag recognition guides and silhouette charts were used to classify vessels. In cases of uncertainty, commanders closed a shorter range before deciding on action. Weather and sea state influenced these decisions, as heavy seas obscured markings and affected stability during periscope observation. Attacks were executed under varying conditions. Daylight submerged attacks required precise calculations and patience, often involving extended tracking of a target to achieve favorable firing angles. Night surface attacks emphasized speed and surprise. In both cases, torpedo reliability remained a concern. Reports continued to note instances of duds and premature detonations, though contact pistols showed improved performance compared to earlier magnetic devices. Following successful hits, submarines observed target behavior. Some ships stopped dead in the water, emitting steam or smoke. Others continued forward briefly before slowing. Structural failure patterns varied depending on hull construction and cargo. Submarine logs recorded these observations with timestamps. If a ship remained afloat after initial hits, additional torpedoes were fired when available. Deck guns were used selectively, primarily against smaller vessels or to deliver finishing shots when torpedoes were conserved. Escort response times varied. In some areas, escorts arrived within minutes, deploying depth charges aggressively. In others, no immediate response followed an attack. Submarines adjusted behavior accordingly. When escorts were present, boats dove deep and maintained silent running. Depth selection considered water depth, thermal layers, and known enemy tactics. Crews monitored hull integrity and equipment status during prolonged submergence. Internal conditions during these periods were documented in technical logs. Battery discharge rates increased under silent running. Air purification systems were operated intermittently to manage carbon dioxide levels. Temperature and humidity rose steadily. Crew members rotated positions to manage fatigue. Meals were reduced in frequency during high alert periods to conserve resources and minimize movement. As patrols extended farther west, coordination challenges increased. Radio contact with headquarters was less frequent due to distance and transmission restrictions. Submarines operated with greater autonomy, relying on initial orders and situational judgment. When convoys were sighted, brief contact reports were transmitted, including grid position, course, speed, and estimated composition. These reports enabled other boats to converge, though timing often limited coordinated action. Convoy engagements during this period involved repeated attacks over several hours or nights. Submarines shadowed convoys from outside escort range, reporting movements and awaiting opportunities. Escorts employed zigzag courses and varied speeds to complicate tracking. Aircraft occasionally joined escort screens during daylight, forcing submarines to submerge and lose contact. Logs recorded these interruptions and subsequent reacquisition attempts. Losses among merchant shipping continued across multiple regions. Tankers, freighters, and refrigerated cargo ships were among those attacked. Cargo descriptions were inferred from ship type, survivor statements, and observed fires or explosions. Submarine commanders recorded sinkings using standardized tonnage estimates based on recognition manuals. These estimates were later reviewed by staff officers but remained unchanged in patrol logs. Neutral shipping presented additional complexities. Vessels flying neutral flags were encountered along established trade routes. Identification required close observation of markings and papers when possible. In some cases, neutral ships were allowed to proceed after inspection. In others, suspicions regarding cargo or destination led to attack. Such incidents were recorded with detailed notes on identification efforts and circumstances. Minefields increasingly affected operations. Both defensive and offensive mines were laid by various naval forces. Submarines encountered detonations at a distance, indicating nearby fields. Charts were updated based on reports, but gaps remained. Navigation through mined areas required reduced speed and constant depth monitoring. Mine avoidance procedures were followed, including running at depths calculated to pass beneath moored mines when known. Mechanical reliability influenced patrol outcomes. Engine failures, electrical faults, and hydraulic issues were reported with frequency. Crews conducted repairs at sea using available tools and spare parts. Some faults required early termination of patrols. These decisions were logged with explanations limited to technical necessity. Boats returning early reported reduced operational results accordingly. Air threats expanded during this phase. Long-range patrol aircraft increased coverage over Atlantic approaches. Submarines recorded sightings of aircraft silhouettes and engine sounds. Emergency dives were executed upon detection. In some instances, aircraft attacked without warning, dropping bombs or depth charges. Damage assessments were conducted after evasion, noting hull stress, leaks, and equipment displacement. Shore facilities adapted to increased operational tempo. Repair yards operated continuously, addressing battle damage and wear. Torpedo depots inspected returned weapons and adjusted maintenance procedures. Training units incorporated recent patrol experiences into drills. Crews rotated through rest periods before reassignment. Administrative records tracked boat availability, crew status, and material inventories. By mid-1941, operational directives emphasized sustained pressure on shipping routes. Patrol densities increased in certain sectors. Submarines were assigned overlapping areas to maintain continuous presence. This approach required careful coordination to avoid interference and friendly contact. Identification protocols between submarines were established to prevent misidentification during night surface operations. Despite increased escort effectiveness, unescorted vessels remained vulnerable. Submarines encountered lone ships straggling from convoys or operating independently. These targets were attacked using established methods. Logs recorded such encounters alongside convoy engagements, without differentiation in procedural detail. The cumulative activity of this period consisted of repeated patrol cycles, each defined by departure, transit, search, attack, evasion, and return. Records maintained consistency in format and content. Events were documented as they occurred, with emphasis on position, time, and action. The operational environment remained characterized by dispersed engagements, technical challenges, and continuous movement across wide sea areas, all recorded in contemporaneous documentation without modification or commentary. From the summer of 1941 onward, operational orders continued to assign submarines to defined grid sectors across the North Atlantic, western approaches, and waters to the west and southwest of Ireland. Boats departed Atlantic bases in staggered intervals, moving through coastal approach channels under local control instructions and then proceeding into open water on diesel engines. Once clear of coastal patrol limits, radio transmissions were restricted to contact reporting and mandatory position signals. Commanders maintained logs of engine hours, fuel consumption, battery charge status, and daily maintenance routines. Lookouts were posted continuously during surface running, with binocular observation by rotating watchstanders. Submerged periods were conducted at low speed to preserve battery power, and periscope use was limited to short exposures for bearings, range estimation, and target confirmation. Contact with merchant traffic occurred by visual sighting, hydrophone bearing, or receipt of a contact report from another boat. When a ship or convoy was detected, commanders initiated shadowing procedures intended to maintain contact without drawing escort attention. Shadowing was carried out from the surface at night when possible, using the silhouette of the target against the horizon and keeping a position outside the apparent line of escort patrol. During daylight, submerged shadowing relied on intermittent periscope observations and hydrophone bearings. Commanders recorded the target's estimated course and speed, convoy column arrangement when visible, escort type and number, and observed changes in formation. These details were transmitted in short encrypted messages when required by operational directives. When ordered or when opportunity permitted, attack preparations began with maneuvering toward a firing position ahead of the target track. For convoys, commanders selected approach angles based on escort disposition, sea state, and the likelihood of remaining undetected during the final run. Torpedo firing solutions were derived from periscope measurements of mast height and angular speed, combined with timing of target movement across the reticle. Torpedo tube readiness was confirmed by the torpedo room, and firing circuits were checked. In heavy seas, periscope observation was affected by wave action and spray, requiring repeated short observations. In low visibility, commanders relied more heavily on hydrophone tracking and estimated convoy movement, adjusting course incrementally to remain in favorable position. Night surface attacks continued in use where conditions allowed. Boats approached at high speed on diesels, minimizing silhouette by keeping low on the horizon and reducing unnecessary lighting. As the convoy edge was reached, commanders selected individual ships by outline and position within columns. Torpedoes were fired at close range, often at targets within the same or adjacent columns. After firing, boats altered course and speed to exit the convoy area. Escorts responded with searchlights, tracer fire, and depth charge runs. Emergency dives were executed when gunfire or approaching escorts indicated imminent contact. Once submerged, boats went to silent running, reducing speed and securing equipment to minimize noise. Depth was adjusted based on water depth and expected escort attack patterns. Logs recorded the times of depth charge detonations, estimated distances, and resulting damage. Depth charge attacks were frequently prolonged. Escorts maintained sonar contact when possible, executing repeated runs. Explosions caused temporary electrical failures, instrument damage, and hull vibration. Crews monitored pressure hull fittings, valve integrity, and bilge levels. Damage control teams sealed leaks using available materials and shoring. In some cases, external damage to the conning tower and deck fittings was suspected but could not be confirmed until surfacing. Battery compartments were monitored for leaks and gas buildup. Air quality deteriorated during extended submergence, requiring careful use of scrubbers and ventilation when surfacing became possible. Torpedo expenditures and remaining supply were tracked continuously. Commanders balanced the use of torpedoes in convoy attacks against the likelihood of further contact later in the patrol. Reloading procedures were carried out when submerged and conditions permitted. Forward tube reloads required coordination between torpedo room crews and trim adjustments to maintain stability. Stern tube reload capability varied by boat type. Time required for reloads was recorded in logs when it affected tactical opportunities. When torpedoes were depleted or unreliable, deck gun use was considered against lone ships in low-threat areas. Gun actions required surfacing and placing the boat broadside for stable firing. Ammunition supply and gun crew fatigue limited duration. Ships struck by gunfire sometimes abandoned before sinking. In other cases, fires spread slowly, and the submarine remained nearby until sinking was observed or escort threat required departure. Merchant ships encountered during this period included freighters carrying general cargo, bulk carriers with coal or ore, and tankers transporting fuel. Some ships were fitted with defensive guns at the stern or on platforms near the bridge. Gunfire from these ships was recorded in attack reports when encountered. Evasive maneuvers by targets included zigzag courses, increased speed, and smoke deployment where available. Distressed ships transmitted radio calls when able, prompting escort or aircraft response in some areas. Submarines noted radio transmissions by observing antenna activity or by the appearance of escort units after attacks. Air patrol activity increased over wide areas. Aircraft were encountered during daylight and occasionally at dawn and dusk. Lookouts reported aircraft bearing and range on sighting. Standard procedure required immediate crash dive when aircraft were within attack range. Boats submerged rapidly, securing hatches and venting ballast tanks. In several recorded cases, bombs or depth charges detonated near the boat during the dive, causing shock and minor damage. After an aircraft attack, commanders remained submerged for extended periods before surfacing to assess and recharge batteries. When surfacing, 360-degree scans were conducted before opening vents and starting diesels. Radar warning receivers were not universally available, visual detection remained critical. Operational coordination between boats depended on radio traffic and assigned patrol lines. Boats were instructed to report convoy contacts, maintain shadow if possible, and guide other units to interception points. Convergence operations involved multiple boats moving toward a reported convoy route and forming a line across the expected path. Each boat held position within assigned spacing, adjusting as convoy course reports were updated. When a convoy crossed the line, the nearest boats initiated attacks first, with others attacking as contact permitted. Communication between boats during the engagement was limited, and each boat acted independently once contact was established. Reports after such engagements included times of attack, number of torpedoes fired, observed hits, and estimated sinkings. Navigation and operational effectiveness were affected by weather. Autumn and winter conditions in the North Atlantic produced heavy seas, frequent gales, and low visibility. Surface running in storms risked damage to deck fittings and reduced lookout effectiveness. Submerged running in heavy seas involved frequent changes in depth to avoid broaching or excessive periscope wake. Crews endured prolonged wet conditions when surfaced, with limited opportunities to dry clothing. Mechanical wear increased under continuous motion. Logs recorded weather as it affected speed, course keeping, and attack feasibility. Maintenance at sea remained routine but often constrained by operational conditions. Diesel engines required regular oil checks, filter cleaning, and cooling system monitoring. Electrical systems were inspected for insulation damage due to humidity. Hydraulic systems for periscope and torpedo tube operations were checked for leaks. Galley operations were adapted to sea state, with reduced cooking during heavy weather. Freshwater conservation measures continued, with limited washing and strict rationing. Medical issues recorded included respiratory infections, injuries during depth-charge shocks, and fatigue-related conditions. These were entered in medical logs without elaboration. Shoreside operations at Atlantic bases maintained the tempo of departures and returns. Boats returning from patrol were met by harbor control and guided through defended channels. On arrival, patrol reports were submitted, and crews underwent debriefing focused on contact data, escort tactics observed, and technical performance. Torpedo specialists collected information on firing outcomes and malfunctions. Damage inspections were conducted immediately, with attention to pressure hull integrity, battery compartments, and propulsion systems. Boats scheduled for rapid redeployment received priority repairs and resupply. Crew rest periods were assigned according to operational requirements. Replacement personnel were integrated as needed. During late 1941, patrol areas and targets reflected expanded operational directives. Submarines operated across wider sections of the Atlantic, including routes used by shipping from North America and from southern approaches. Contact with independently sailing ships increased in some regions where convoy coverage was incomplete. Attacks on such ships were conducted with standard procedures. In several cases, ships attempted to escape by increasing speed or altering course, but their ability to outrun a surfaced submarine was limited under many conditions. Submarines recorded pursuit durations, ranges at firing, and final outcomes. Where ships sent distress signals, escorts sometimes arrived after the attack, initiating search patterns that forced the submarine to withdraw. Rules regarding interaction with survivors continued to vary by tactical circumstances. When escort threat was absent and operational orders permitted, some commanders surfaced to collect ship papers or to question survivors briefly about cargo and destination. In other instances, commanders departed immediately after confirming sinking to avoid aircraft or escort response. Lifeboats and rafts were noted in logs with position and number where observed. No further action was recorded beyond these observations unless specific orders applied. In the same period, defensive measures along convoy routes increased. Escorts employed more systematic screening patterns and maintained tighter station keeping at night. Some convoys used additional escort vessels on the flanks and rear. Searchlight use and star shell illumination were recorded during night engagements. Depth charge patterns were noted as more frequent and coordinated, with multiple escorts participating. Submarines observed that escorts sometimes maintained contact for extended periods, alternating attack runs to prevent the submarine from surfacing. Boats responded by altering depth, reducing speed, and using minor course changes to complicate sonar tracking. When possible, boats used thermal layers and changes in water conditions to reduce detection. Logs recorded depth changes and times at each depth. Minefields and patrol barriers remained hazards near coastal approaches. Submarines transiting near the British Isles avoided known mine zones and relied on updated chart information received before departure. Despite precautions, detonations were occasionally heard, indicating nearby mines or other explosions. Boats adjusted routes accordingly. Coastal waters required careful depth control due to shoals and fishing activity. Fishing vessels and small craft were encountered, and commanders recorded their presence as navigation hazards and potential reporting risks. As 1942 began, operational orders expanded submarine activity into additional sea areas, including Western Atlantic routes and approaches where merchant traffic was observed traveling with reduced escort coverage in certain sectors. Long-distance patrols required strict fuel discipline. Boats planned submerged and surfaced running to maximize endurance. Weather and sea conditions in these areas differed from North Atlantic sectors, with periods of calmer seas and higher visibility. Increased visibility affected surface attack risk due to longer detection ranges. Commanders adjusted by approaching at night and limiting daylight surface exposure. Merchant ships in these routes often sailed singly or in small groups. Submarines conducted attacks from the surface at night or from submerged position during daylight depending on conditions. Reports recorded frequent sightings of navigation lights where blackout discipline was not fully applied in certain areas. Submarines exploited such sightings to close range and attack. Ships were struck by torpedoes and sank under varying conditions. In some cases, ships remained afloat after initial damage, requiring additional torpedoes or gunfire. Fires from fuel cargoes were observed and recorded with time and distance. The response by local naval forces included patrol craft and aircraft. Submarines recorded rapid increases in patrol presence after attacks in certain zones. Aircraft were observed conducting systematic searches, flying low and dropping flares at night. Submarines avoided these threats by remaining submerged during daylight, surfacing only in darkness to recharge. Battery management remained critical. Boats operating in warm climates recorded higher internal temperatures and increased humidity. Ventilation was limited when submerged. Crews used ventilation fans when surfacing, but risk of detection required minimizing time on the surface in threatened areas. Convoy systems in these regions expanded as shipping losses were reported. Submarines noted the appearance of escorted formations and the reduction of independently sailing ships over time. Attacks shifted accordingly, returning to convoy shadowing and night surface penetration tactics. Escorts included destroyers and smaller escorts, sometimes equipped with improved detection equipment. Submarines recorded sightings of radar-equipped ships by noting sudden illumination, changes in escort maneuvering toward the submarine at night, and aircraft guided to surfaced boat positions. In response, boats reduced surface exposure and increased the use of submerged approaches even at night, accepting reduced speed for concealment. Radio discipline remained in force. Contact reports were transmitted according to protocol, including grid position, convoy course and speed, and escort estimate. Transmission durations were kept short. Direction-finding threats were considered, and boats altered course after transmitting when feasible. Headquarters issued new patrol line assignments based on received reports. Submarines complied with these changes, adjusting course and speed as ordered, and logging the receipt and execution of each signal. Operational losses among submarines continued. Boats that failed to return were recorded administratively as missing after their expected return dates passed without contact. No cause was entered unless information was received from other sources. Replacement boats entered service from shipyards, and crews were assigned following training cycles. Training emphasized rapid diving, periscope discipline, torpedo firing procedures, and damage control under depth charge attack. Returning crews provided practical details during debriefings, including escort maneuvers observed, aircraft attack methods, and areas of increased patrol density. The pattern of events through this phase remained defined by repeated patrol cycles and documented actions. Each patrol log preserved the sequence of departure, transit, search, contact, attack, evasion, and return, with entries focused on time, position, and procedure. Changes in routes, escort response, and air patrol presence were recorded as they were observed during operations. Boats continued to move through assigned sectors, locate targets, execute attacks under prevailing conditions, and withdraw under countermeasures, maintaining contemporaneous documentation in operational formats. From early 1942, boats assigned to Western Atlantic patrols operated under endurance constraints and shifting security conditions along coastal routes. After leaving French bases, transit proceeded through the Bay of Biscay under procedures intended to reduce exposure to air patrols. Boats submerged during daylight in zones of known aircraft activity and surfaced at night to recharge batteries and make speed. Lookouts remained posted whenever on the surface, and crash dive readiness was maintained. Reports noted that aircraft sightings in transit frequently occurred at long range in clear weather and at short range in haze or low cloud. When aircraft were observed approaching, boats executed emergency dives, securing upper deck fittings as time allowed and venting ballast tanks to achieve rapid submergence. Upon reaching assigned western areas, commanders established patrol routines based on local conditions. In regions where merchant vessels were observed using coastal navigation, boats took station along predictable tracks outside harbor approaches and near promontories where ships altered course. Visual detection at night remained dependent on the presence of navigation lights, masthead silhouettes, and the luminous wake of ships in calm seas. Hydrophone bearing work was used when visibility was reduced. When a target was detected, commanders closed range on the surface in darkness to conserve battery power and retain speed advantage. Attack preparation included verification of torpedo tube readiness, setting of depth and pistol type, and computation of target speed and angle. Firing was carried out from close range when feasible to reduce solution error. In multiple patrol reports from this period, commanders recorded that several targets traveled independently and maintained lighting standards inconsistent with blackout practice. Boats exploited these conditions to approach without extended search. Torpedoes were fired into engine rooms or forward holds depending on target angle and estimated cargo distribution. After impact, ships frequently stopped and took on list. Fires were observed where fuel or flammable cargo was carried. Time to sinking varied, and commanders recorded sinking times when visually confirmed. Where the ship remained afloat after initial damage, a second torpedo or gunfire was used if threat conditions permitted. Deck gun actions were conducted only after the area was scanned and no aircraft or patrol craft were observed, and only when sea state allowed stable platform use. Ammunition expenditure was recorded, including number of rounds fired and observed effect on target structure. Survivors were regularly observed in boats and rafts. Entries in the war diary noted the presence of lifeboats, the approximate number of persons visible, and the bearing and distance at the time the submarine withdrew. When tactical circumstances permitted and orders allowed, some commanders surfaced near survivors to identify ship name and flag by direct observation and to collect shipping papers if available. When escort or air threat existed, commanders departed immediately after confirming the ship's condition. In several instances, survivors were observed signaling with lamps or flares. The submarine did not remain in the area beyond the minimum required for observation and logging. After attacks in coastal waters, local response sometimes followed within hours. Patrol craft and aircraft conducted searches using flares at night and low-level sweeps in daylight. Boats responded by remaining submerged during daylight and limiting surface time at night. Battery charging schedules were adjusted to the shortest practical periods, with diesels operated at higher output when conditions allowed. Logs recorded the time surfaced, time submerged, battery percentage estimates, and fuel consumption. In warm waters, internal temperature rose rapidly and humidity increased. Crews ventilated compartments whenever surfaced, with hatches opened as permitted by visibility and sea conditions. Air purification systems were used during prolonged submerged intervals to control carbon dioxide buildup. Radio reporting remained restricted. Boats transmitted contact reports when convoys were sighted or when directed by standing orders to report shipping density and escort patterns. Messages included grid position, course, speed, and estimated number of ships and escorts. Transmission time was kept brief. After transmitting, boats altered course to reduce the risk of direction-finding correlation. Receipt of orders from headquarters included changes to patrol areas, instructions to intercept reported convoys, and occasionally orders to shift to alternate sectors due to reported air patrol intensity. Commanders logged receipt time and execution. As independent sailings decreased in some coastal sectors, convoy activity increased. Boats encountering convoys adopted shadowing procedures. Shadowing at night was conducted on the surface at range, maintaining a position outside expected escort patrol arcs. Escorts were observed conducting periodic turns outward from the convoy and returning to station, with variations between convoys. Commanders recorded escort behavior, including speed changes, use of star shells, and occasional gunfire at suspected contacts. When the convoy maintained a steady course, submarines attempted to gain position ahead for a submerged daylight attack or a night surface penetration. In convoy attacks, torpedo firing was conducted against ships within columns, frequently aiming at the forward third of the convoy where targets were less likely to have already taken evasive action. Firing often used spreads, with 2 to 4 torpedoes launched in succession. Reloads were initiated immediately after firing if time and trim allowed. Escorts responded with depth charge runs. Under attack, boats descended to depths determined by local water depth and the need to avoid pattern settings. Silent running procedures included stopping unnecessary machinery, reducing internal movement, and maintaining minimal speed. Depth charge detonations caused structural shock and internal equipment displacement. Crews secured loose objects and conducted rapid checks for leaks. Damage reports included cracked gauge glass, minor flooding through seals, and occasional electrical shorts due to moisture and vibration. Where battery compartment leaks occurred, crews monitored for chlorine gas risk and isolated affected areas. In the mid-Atlantic, boats reported that convoys were increasingly accompanied by escort groups capable of sustained pursuit. Escorts maintained contact for extended periods, alternating runs to prevent the submarine from surfacing. Boats responded with small course changes at low speed and use of depth changes to break sonar contact. When contact was lost, boats remained submerged for additional time before surfacing cautiously at night. Surface scans were conducted in full circle with binocular observation. If aircraft were detected, the boat submerged again without charging. This cycle reduced patrol efficiency and increased strain on batteries and crew endurance. Technical reliability continued to influence operational results. Diesel engine faults, particularly in cooling systems and fuel injection, were recorded during long patrols. Electric motor issues included overheating and bearing wear. Hydraulic leaks affected periscope operation and torpedo tube mechanisms. Crews conducted repairs at sea using spare parts and improvised seals. Some failures required reduced speed or restricted diving depth. In such cases, commanders noted the limitation and adjusted tactics, avoiding areas of heavy escort activity and favoring attacks where rapid withdrawal was less essential. Boats with significant damage returned early to base, transmitting necessary signals and navigating along prescribed routes. Upon return to base, patrol reporting followed standard procedure. Commanders submitted war diaries and patrol reports. Staff officers received details on shipping sightings, convoy routes, and escort composition. Torpedo officers collected data on firing outcomes, including any malfunctions or unusual running behavior. Boats underwent technical inspection and repair scheduling. Pressure hull checks, battery maintenance, and engine overhauls were prioritized according to redeployment plans. Crews were granted rest periods of varying length and reassigned as required. Replacement personnel joined boats to fill losses or to expand operational capacity. As 1942 progressed, air patrol coverage expanded further in the Bay of Biscay and in patrol areas. Boats recorded increased frequency of aircraft sightings and attacks, including the use of flares and coordinated search patterns at night. Some reports noted aircraft approaching surfaced boats without being detected until close range, indicating improved detection methods. In response, boats reduced surface time, increased submerged transit in threatened zones, and used night surface periods in weather conditions that reduced visibility. Storms and heavy seas provided concealment but complicated battery charging and lookout effectiveness. Boats surfaced into heavy seas at reduced speed, taking water over the deck. Ventilation was limited by spray and wave impact. Logs recorded these conditions and the resulting reduced charging efficiency. Escort tactics continued to develop. Convoys were observed using tighter formations and increased escort spacing. Escorts executed barrier sweeps ahead of convoys, forcing submarines to remain at greater distance or to risk early detection. Some escorts used illumination sparingly, relying instead on patrol patterns and sudden course changes. Submarines recorded incidents where escorts turned directly toward suspected contacts immediately after a submarine's torpedoes detonated, indicating rapid response discipline. In such cases, boats initiated deeper dives and longer silent running periods. Where depth allowed, boats used greater depths to reduce the effectiveness of shallow patterns. In shallow waters, boats were forced to remain at depths that increased vulnerability, and commanders avoided such areas when possible. Merchant ship defenses also increased. More vessels carried defensive guns and maintained heightened lookout. Some ships fired at periscope sightings or suspected wakes. Submarines recorded instances of merchant ships turning toward a perceived submarine track, attempting to ram or to force a miss in firing solution. These maneuvers required commanders to adjust attack angles and to fire at shorter ranges when possible. Zigzag patterns remained common. For submerged attacks, commanders waited for a predictable segment of the zigzag cycle to establish a stable solution. Where zigzag was irregular, firing spreads were used to compensate, increasing torpedo expenditure. In late 1942, boats operating in the North Atlantic recorded increased convoy speed and improved escort coordination. Some convoys included support ships and additional escort units. Aircraft coverage over convoys increased in certain sectors, forcing submarines to remain submerged during daylight and limiting contact persistence. When aircraft forced a boat down and contact was lost, commanders attempted to reacquire by hydrophone bearings and estimated convoy movement. In many cases, reacquisition required hours of maneuvering at low speed, reducing the likelihood of attack. Logs recorded these efforts as continuous entries of bearing changes, course corrections, and intermittent periscope observations. Communication security remained a constant operational factor. Boats adhered to message discipline, transmitting only when required. When contact reports were transmitted, boats sometimes received instructions to maintain shadow, while other boats were directed toward interception. These operations required continuous updates, but transmission constraints limited frequency. Commanders used judgment on when to transmit follow-up reports based on convoy course changes and distance to the convoy. In some engagements, multiple boats arrived in the area at different times, attacking sequentially over one or more nights. Each boat recorded its own actions, including attack times, torpedoes fired, observed hits, and evasive maneuvers. Coordination was indirect, through headquarters signals and contact reports, rather than direct tactical communication between boats during the engagement. Weather continued to shape outcomes. In winter conditions, heavy seas disrupted periscope observations and made surface approach hazardous. Icing affected deck fittings and increased the risk of slipping during lookout and gun operations. Cold temperatures reduced crew comfort and complicated maintenance, with lubricants thickening and condensation affecting electrical systems. Boats operated with heaters where available, but internal moisture remained high due to limited ventilation. Medical logs recorded frost-related skin issues in exposed personnel and general fatigue from prolonged watch standing in harsh conditions. In early 1943, patrol reports indicated persistent engagement with convoys in the North Atlantic, with escorts conducting aggressive countermeasures. Boats recorded extended periods under depth charge attack, sometimes lasting several hours. In such periods, crews maintained silent running, monitored hull stress, and executed depth changes in response to perceived escort positions. Hydrophone operators attempted to track escort propeller noises to estimate approach and withdrawal. Commanders used these bearings to time course changes between escort runs. When depth charge patterns bracketed the boat, internal shock increased. Damage control entries included minor ruptures in piping, valve leaks, and displacement of battery cells in severe cases. When damage threatened diving safety, boats prepared to surface at the first possible moment of darkness or reduced threat. In these same months, some boats reported detection and engagement of surfaced submarines at night by escort units approaching at speed and opening fire. Submarines responded with emergency dives or evasive turns on the surface, depending on distance and sea room. Gunfire damage to conning tower structures and deck equipment was recorded in some reports. When emergency dives were executed under fire, incomplete securing of deck fitting sometimes resulted in water ingress through open vents or damaged seals. Crews managed flooding with pumps and by isolating compartments. Boats that sustained significant surface damage returned to base for repairs. The balance of submerged versus surfaced operations shifted as detection threats increased. Boats spent longer periods submerged, which reduced average speed and limited ability to reposition rapidly for intercept. This affected convoy interception attempts, especially when contact reports were received at distance. Commanders calculated whether interception was feasible based on estimated convoy speed and bearing. If interception was judged impractical, boats resumed area search within assigned sector. Logs recorded these decisions in operational terms, noting time, position, and calculation basis without additional commentary. Torpedo handling remained central. Boats carried a limited number of torpedoes, and expenditure planning was necessary during convoy operations. Some commanders prioritized high-tonnage targets such as tankers when identifiable, while others fired at the most accessible ships within columns under time constraints. Identification at night often relied on silhouette and position rather than exact ship type. After attacks, commanders noted the number of detonations heard, the observation of fires, and the sinking or stopping of ships. Where uncertainty existed, reports recorded observed behavior without asserting sinking. These entries included statements such as ship stopped, ship burning, ship sinking by stern, or ship last seen still afloat with list. Defensive devices such as acoustic decoys were encountered. Submarines recorded hearing unusual noises during escort pursuit and observed depth charges detonating at distance from the boat's estimated position. Escorts sometimes altered tactics mid-pursuit, shifting from steady runs to irregular patterns. Boats adapted by reducing speed and altering depth to avoid homing behavior of certain threats when suspected. Hydrophone operators monitored for new sounds, and commanders logged these observations and their immediate tactical responses. Losses among submarines continued to be recorded administratively. Boats that failed to return were listed as missing after designated periods. Operational staff reassigned patrol sectors to maintain coverage. New boats entered service and were integrated into flotillas. Training emphasized rapid crash dives, silent running discipline, and procedures under prolonged attack. Crews drilled on damage control, including sealing leaks, managing battery hazards, and maintaining trim under flooding conditions. These procedures were described in training notes and reinforced through patrol experience. As 1943 continued, boats operating in the Atlantic recorded increasing difficulty sustaining contact with convoys under combined escort and air coverage. Aircraft presence over convoy routes reduced the number of hours boats could remain surfaced for shadowing and charging. Some boats attempted to shadow submerged during daylight using hydrophones, but changes in convoy course and speed reduced accuracy. Night contact depended on visibility and the ability to surface without immediate detection. Reports noted occasions when surfaced boats were forced down by aircraft or escort approach, losing contact. In such cases, commanders recorded the time contact was lost and the subsequent search pattern conducted. Operational directives continued to assign boats to sectors and to prioritize interception of reported convoys. Boats maintained patrol discipline, submitting required position signals and contact reports. When no contacts occurred, boats logged weather, sea state, and search track completion. Hydrophone watches continued, and periscope scans were conducted at intervals. The absence of contacts was recorded as such, with routine entries of course, speed, and maintenance actions. When contacts were made, the same sequence of detection, approach, attack preparation, and engagement followed, adjusted for prevailing threat conditions. In shore bases, repair capacity remained under constant demand. Boats returned with wear from extended submerged running and damage from depth charges. Batteries required maintenance and periodic replacement. Engines underwent overhaul. Hull inspections addressed stress and minor deformation. Replacement parts were allocated according to operational priority. Crews underwent medical checks and were reassigned after rest. Debriefings continued to focus on observed escort tactics, aircraft behavior, and technical performance, with notes distributed in summarized form to departing boats. These summaries listed observed procedures and reported hazards by area, without general statements beyond operational relevance. Throughout this phase, the record remained composed of patrol logs, contact reports, and technical entries. Each engagement was documented in terms of time, position, actions taken, and immediate observations. Boats continued to depart, transit, search, attack when opportunity arose, evade countermeasures, and return under the same operational framework. The written record preserved the sequence of events as entered during operations, with emphasis on procedures, mechanical conditions, and reported contacts across assigned sea areas.